Cameron's here, right? Yeah. Mackenzie. Alexa's not here. Oops, he's not here yet. Sadie. Morning, Jarek.
Good morning.
Ryan's here. Ethan's here. Brittany's here. Ty, I don't see on. Chase. Anna. Corey, I don't see yet. Grace. Jarek is here. Okay, so today we are going to continue on with our lessons through the different mediums. We're going to be doing printmaking today, which is a great follow-up after painting because you do use paints and inks to make prints. There are going to be portions today when we're going to be watching videos. I'm saying this mostly for the people online. If at any point you do not see or hear the video, please unmute and let me know, because I won't know unless anyone tells me. This chapter is a bit deceptive. If you look down here, it says it's only 25 slides, but it's actually fairly long. It's just there's not very many slides. So with printmaking, just like painting and drawing, there are a whole bunch of different kinds of printmaking, and we're going to be going through each one today, starting with the most basic and getting to the newest like we have been. Reasons for making prints. First and foremost, it is so that you can make a bunch of copies of something. People oftentimes ask me, why don't they just make a painting? Why make a bunch of copies of something? Why can't you just make a painting? Well, a painting takes a lot of time to do. Prints require one form of like a stencil or a stamp, and then you can make a bunch of copies of the same thing over and over again. So with printmaking, you have the ability to make multiple copies, which means that you can either disseminate your information a lot better, or you can sell a bunch of different copies. Granted, when there are more copies of something, it becomes less valuable. That has to do with supply and demand. And that's the other thing that confuses people when we get to printmaking. If you don't know what supply and demand is, then just wait for your economy class because you will learn. And supply and demand is very important with printmaking. The amount of editions made or copies made in prints usually helps to determine the value. So if, let's say, there were 1,000 copies made, that's quite a bit. That's not considered limited edition when there's 1,000 or more. So your prints would be less valuable than, let's say, if there were only 10 copies. Once again, supply and demand. But the main reasons for people to make prints is to make multiple copies, to either be able to sell multiple copies, or to get their information out quickly to a lot of different people. The amount of copies made is indicated in the edition number on the print. An edition number tells us how many copies there are and what copy that is in the set. For example, if we saw a 45 over 105, that would tell us there are 105 copies, and this is the 45th copy. Or if we saw 4 over 10, we would see that there are 10 copies, and this is the 4th copy of the 10. The lower your number of copies, once again, the more valuable it's going to be because it's considered limited edition. And the lower in the number of copies you are, so like 45 or 4, the more valuable your. If yours is the first copy made out of 105, yours is going to be quite rare and valuable. That has to do with the fact that the more copies you make, the more your stencils and printmaking devices wear out. So the later in the edition set you make your print, the less detailed, less colorful it's going to be. So you're going to, which is bringing us into new territory. So far in this class, we haven't really been discussing price ranges. But today, for the first time, we're discussing values and price ranges. Because once again, you're going to want your first out of 105 because that's a lot more valuable than 105 out of 105. So a great example of that can be seen on that website that I told you guys to check out, possibly for your project, and that is artsy.net. So artsy.net has everything that could possibly ever be for sale in the art world all in one place, and it tells you the prices usually. Sometimes the galleries don't list the prices for really special artists like Keith Haring. Keith Haring is a really popular printmaker and graffiti artist, and his stuff is really coveted right now. You have to contact for the price value. But in this one, you can see that this is an edition of 200. It doesn't tell you which number in that set it is. You would never want to buy a print without knowing the number it is in the edition. So that would be something else that you would want to call and ask for. So if you were interested, you would contact Pace Prints and ask those questions and see how much that's worth. But artsy.net is really a fun place to be if you're interested in valuations for art. Let's say if we click the price here. So here we see this print is 75,000 pounds, which would translate to probably 100 grand here. And it's an edition of 100. But once again, you would never want to buy this without knowing which number in the edition it is. And there's always a little bit of information down here. Yeah. And you can do this for paintings and photographs and stuff like that too. So once again, the main purpose for printmaking is to make many, many copies. Once again, there's a fine line between too many copies and just the right amount. So if you make too many copies, your art value is going to go down. So you're going to want to make enough to make money off of, especially if you're someone like Andy Warhol. So this is Andy Warhol's Marilyn diptych, which is a bunch of different prints of Marilyn Monroe over and over. And this is a great illustration of what happens the more copies you make. You can kind of see that her face gets really blurry and muddy there. That's just an illustration to show you that the more copies you make, the less fresh it's going to look. Warhol did this on purpose though. He didn't clean his stencils after he used them so that he could get these differences, because he wanted his prints to mimic what we are as humans. We are all the same, and yet everyone is different. So he didn't clean his silkscreen stencils so that every single one would be a little bit different. That's one of the things that makes Warhol really collectible, because all of his prints, even though they're copies, none of them are the same. There's just another image of one of his Marilyn prints. And we're going to actually watch a video later that shows us how he made these, and you can learn how to make them yourself. So a little bit of background history about printmaking. It originated from China and then moved into Europe. Of course, we're talking about our book printing and typeset printing here. Eventually movable type is going to be created, but early printmaking was primarily used for books. By the 9th century, China was printing images with their printmaking devices. And then, like I said, in the 11th century, we have movable type, and it's not until the 15th century that Europe adopts printmaking, but once again, they primarily begin using it just to print text, specifically the Bible. And then they eventually start printing other books and images as well. It's when the 19th century hits that we start seeing printmaking used for billboards, posters, advertisements, as well as art a little bit more frequently. So different printmaking that we're going to be covering today. We're going to be going over relief prints first. Those are the most basic and the first ones that were used, followed by intaglio, lithography, stencil, and silkscreen printing. Stencil and silkscreen are the most modern. And the one thing that they have in common is that they are used to make copies. Okay, we're going to start off going over relief, which is the most basic and the oldest form of printmaking and art. It's most closely associated with Japanese prints, specifically the woodcut. With relief, prints, there are three types. There's woodcut, wood engraving, and lino cut. We're going to go over the differences between all of them in a second. But with relief prints, the thing that they all have in common is that you are carving away and cutting just like you would a rubber stamp to leave an impression of your image. So I'm going to stop sharing for a second for my people online. I'll put it back up in a moment. So here you can see this is a great example of actually a lino cut. We have carved away the extra bits and we have the image sticking out. So that's what we're talking about with relief prints. Anyone confused yet? Because it's going to get more complicated when we go on. Okay, just checking. So you're carving away the parts that you don't need to leave your image. Okay, so our first relief is a woodcut, also known as a wood block print. Once again, it was very, very popular in Japan, specifically during a period of time called the ukiyo-e period. Ukiyo-e literally translates to pictures of the floating world, and it's just scenes of everyday life. So with a woodcut or wood block print, you would use a soft piece of wood and carve away the excess, leaving your image behind, just like the stamp that we just looked at. So the image on this stamp was raised. That's how a wood block print is. We're going to look at our next example, wood engraving, which is the opposite, where the image is recessed into the stamp. So there's going to be a lot of me going back and forth with the video right now. So just bear with that. So once again, you can see that our image here is raised. Just pretend this was wood instead of rubber, and that's exactly what your wood block print is. Now, how many colors can I stamp with this? Huh? One, exactly, Anna. Thank you. You can do one color with this. Now, let's say I wanted to do the pizza part in orange and the pepperonis in red. What would I have to do? Sorry, what? Kind of, but that would be no different than painting, right? And we're trying to make this quick and fast because we're trying to make money. So what's another solution to that problem? Separate the parts. Very good. So in order to get our pizza orange and our pepperonis red, we would make two different blocks. We would make one block with our pizza and one block with our pepperonis. We would use the orange paint for the pizza and the red paint for the pepperonis. And that's exactly how our print here was made. Every color has a different block. You would start with your background first, and you'd go and get like 30 pieces of paper into your background and let that dry. And then you'd go and do your next foreground, your middle ground, and then your foreground, and let every single one dry. And by the end of the day, you'd have 30 prints. So I think that's the best I've ever explained that before, because usually people get confused. Anyone confused with that? No? Okay. Because usually I mess up somewhere along the line when I'm explaining that one. So that's a wood cut. Once again, with a wood cut, the image is raised. And a great example of a wood cut print that everyone knows is Hokusai's The Great Wave. So once again, you would start off with your background colors and work your way to the foreground with the different colors and shades. So you'd need quite a few different color blocks for this one. But once you get those blocks made, you can use them continuously until they wear out. Which is why there's so many prints of this. There's several thousand prints of this. We made a lot of copies. Another example of a woodblock or woodcut print is Emil Nolde's Prophet. This one obviously only used one block. There's only one color. There's no foreground, middle ground, or background with this one. Now moving on from woodblock to wood engraving. Wood engraving is very similar to woodblock, except instead of having your image raised like it is here, it'd be recessed. So your image would be recessed into this. Another difference between woodblock and wood engraving is you can only do one color. Wood engraving is really popular to use for book illustrations. You would use a denser piece of wood for this one because you have to use a lot more pressure to get your image onto the paper, so you'd want a denser piece of wood so it doesn't wear out. If you used a soft piece of wood, that image would wear out fairly quickly. And it is wood engraving prints that are most usually used for making multiple copies of something to spread social concern. Of course, today we just use printers. And here's an example of a wood engraving print. This one's by Rockwell Kent. And our last type of relief is a lino cut. This rubber stamp is literally a lino cut. Instead of using wood, we use rubber. Rubber is a newer material. So it is the modern form of woodblock printing. Instead of carving into wood, now we carve into rubber. It's a lot easier to carve into and a lot more durable than wood. Wood will once again wear down after too many copies and you'd have to remake your block. Rubber doesn't usually do that. Just like with your woodblock prints though, if you're doing a lino cut, every single color or layer is going to have a different block. But it's just a fancy word for a rubber stamp, lino cut. Next, we're going to move on from using wood and rubber stamps to using metal plates. Does anyone have any inclination why metal might be preferred over wood? Just a guess. It is a lot easier to reuse. Metal is less likely to wear out. You can also get a lot finer details with the metal plates versus wood. Because you can use metal etching tools on those and get really fine, small details. So that takes us to intaglio. Intaglio is, instead of using wood, you use a metal plate. And also, instead of leaving your image out, like your woodblock print, you're going to carve your image into or have a recessed image in your metal plate. So you would carve or etch is what this is actually called doing. You're etching your image into this metal plate. Then you're going to apply ink to the metal plate, wipe the ink off of the areas that you don't want it on, and then very heavily press paper, usually with a weight of some sort, onto that plate. Like it says today, instead of using metal, we oftentimes prefer to use plastic. Once again, it's cheap, durable, easy to carve into, a little bit easier to come by and work with than metal. The idea of using metal tools to etch or scrape onto a metal plate just doesn't sound good to me. It makes me feel like nails on a chalkboard, because the tools that they're using are very fine, pointed metal pieces. And it just doesn't sound nice to me. Plastic sounds a little bit nicer. We see intaglio prints pop up a lot during the Renaissance period, particularly in the Northern Renaissance. And a lot of artists in that area use them. For example, Rembrandt van Rijn and Albrecht Dürer both took advantage of the intaglio print method. So with intaglio prints, you're only going to get one color. So that means you only have to do one plate. So there's an advantage to that. You can also get a lot more detail with this one. For example, here with Albrecht Dürer's rhinoceros, I did not misspell it. That is how he spelled rhinoceros. This was made during the Renaissance, so this was done off of word of mouth of what people thought a rhinoceros would look like, which is interesting to think about. And then above that is a little brief description of what a rhinoceros looks like and is like. And this was released to try and disseminate information. They're trying to show people what this rhinoceros in Africa that people have found looks like. Obviously, they were very off. And here's another Albrecht Dürer. This is The Night, Death, and the Devil. This one was not done for informational purposes. This one was made for artistic purposes. Albrecht Dürer did a lot of prints based off of the idea of hell. This was done during the Renaissance period once again, which was when new religions were popping up. So it's pretty common for a Northern European to want to explore the idea of what happens when we die, which is what we see here in this print. You can see the wonderful shading, the lights and darks, the fine, small details. That is thanks to him using the metal plate and the metal tools to etch onto it. And Another example of a different artist that used intaglio prints is Rembrandt van Rijn. Rembrandt van Rijn, with his painting and his printmaking, likes to do wispy lines and feathery lines. So he has a different artistic take to how he likes to create things in comparison to other artists from his time period, especially in comparison to this one. It's quite a bit softer. That's because he was doing an engraving called dry point, which is when you're using a very fine tipped dry metal needle to get fine lines. And you'll notice some of the drawing techniques that we talked about on drawing day carried over into the printmaking. To get the shadows, he did cross hatching. And here you just see regular hatching. And if we look really close in the background, you can see our third version of hatching back there. So you would make an intaglio print the same way you would make a drawing. It's just instead of pencil and paper, you're using metal and metal. And here is a print self-portrait of the artist. And that takes us to our third version of printmaking, lithography. This is the one that we have to watch a video on because there's a lot of chemicals used and I can never remember all of the names of the chemicals. But with this one, it works on the idea of grease and water repelling each other. And we're literally going to be using acid to carve into a stone. So with this one, we are using a stone. For relief, once again, we're using either rubber or wood. Intaglio is metal, or contemporary intaglio is plastic. This one, you're using wood, or not wood, stone. And here's where we get to the video where if you are online, you're gonna have to let me know if you can't hear or see something. Let me see if I can get that a little bit louder. They messed with our speakers and now it doesn't connect to the big one. I think that's as loud as we're gonna get it. Really quiet. I'll be stopping periodically to explain it anyway, so. So right now he's making sure that that stone is level, because if there's like a warp in it and you apply pressure to it, your stone's going to break. He's also adding a grit texture to it. Depending on how fine or rough your grit is, that will affect the image later on after you apply ink to it. So if you want it to be super, super smooth, you would probably want to use that little swirling tool with the grit on it quite a bit to make sure it was really smooth. And if you want it to have a rougher texture, then you might skip that step.
Professor McBride, we can't hear it, and where the bar is for the teams, it goes across where the subtitles are. So
okay, I'm going to be pausing it periodically anyways to describe what's going on.
Okay.
So we should be okay with this one. This one's super quiet. The next video is loud. So So right now he's using grease touche and he is applying it in the background layer. Similarly to what we did with the woodblock prints, we have to go layer by layer on this one. So if you want your background to be darker, you're going to be applying a lot more touche or grease to it than in other areas, because once again, lithography works on the idea of grease and water repelling each other. So we're literally painting with grease right now. So he drew a tree and the word lithography onto tracing paper, and now he's putting a red iron oxide on it, and then he's going to put that onto the grease. The iron oxide is going to in turn stick to the grease when he retraces over that in a reverse image. So he's adding more grease into areas that he wants to be darker to add shadow. So he's applying the talc powder to absorb any of the excess grease in order to prepare the stone for the acid that's about to go on. That second one was just a resin, which the guy says resin. That's just so that the acid won't eat too much into the stone. So that's a gum arabic nitric acid mixture that he's applying. And the gum arabic and nitric acid is naturally attracted to the grease portions and it eats into the grease areas. So the more grease that you apply in those areas, the more it's going to eat into it. So the image has already been eaten into the stone with the nitric acid, so we don't need that image anymore. So now he's cleaning it off. So ink was applied to the lithography stone, and then paper and some weight. And voila, that is how lithography works. So it's a bit time consuming. That press is fairly heavy. So you're going to want to make a strong enough etch into your stone so that it doesn't wear out quickly. Otherwise, you're going to have to start over again from scratch. Artists that used lithography to make their prints are people like Henry Toulouse-Lautrec and his posters for Parisian nightlife, such as Jane Avril. So we primarily see lithography used in the art world for movement prints, specifically during the late 1800s, early 1900s, for large posters. And just like with woodblock prints, with this one, for every color that you're doing, you have to make a different stone. Because otherwise, once again, you have to be hand painting that area, and that would take a long time, and you might as well just make a painting at that point. Another example of lithography being used in another Toulouse-Lautrec is in the Ambassadors. That takes us to our modern versions of printmaking, silkscreen and stencil. Silkscreen is extremely popular at this moment in time. It's very easy to use. You can make silkscreens at home. We use silkscreens for a lot of everyday objects that you wouldn't think of. T-shirts with print on them are made with silkscreen print. And pants with prints on them are made with silkscreen prints. We use them a lot and we don't even realize it. Once again, for every layer of color, you have to have a different screen. And silk screens get their name because you use silk screens of fabric. Silk fabric is used primarily. And once again, for this one, we're going to watch a video. This one's video is louder. I have to have the tech guys come back in to fix the sound, I guess. So we are going to be looking at Warhol for silk screens. That is the technique that he used in all of his prints. And he's probably the most prominent silk screen printer that like everyone recognizes. So she found her photograph and she printed it on tracing paper. Right now, she's working on her different layers of stencils that she wants. And now she's getting ready to make the actual silk screens themselves. That teal colored thing is a photosensitive emulsion, meaning it's light sensitive. So right now it's liquid, but if it's exposed to light, it's going to harden. She's going to use those blacked out stencils to make certain areas harden and certain areas stay liquid. So do you apply the layer of that photo emulsion? So you're kind of getting the gist. It's going to harden in certain areas and not harden in others, depending on where the light hits it. Now she's cleaning off the emulsion areas that she doesn't want that stayed liquid. Now she's just making the paints. She's putting tape over areas that she doesn't want ink going through. Now she's doing a test to see if it's where she wants it to be. Right now she's just pressing the paint or ink through the mesh. Now she's cleaning off her screen. Now she's moving on to her next layer. And voila, that is how silkscreen prints are made. Questions about that one? So like I said, silkscreen prints are extremely popular at this moment in time. Here is an example of, once again, Andy Warhol. This is done on a custom made silkscreen, obviously, because it's huge. Warhol, it's important to keep in mind, had a whole studio team working for him. So it's not like he was doing stuff by himself. He had a team of people that he didn't really pay, but yeah, volunteers. And then our last form of printmaking or making multiple copies is a stencil. I mentioned yesterday with painting that stencils are frequently used with graffiti art today. So oftentimes graffiti artists that are really, really good and don't want to get caught, they'll pre-make stencils. Once again, every layer, you'll start with your background, will have a different stencil working your way to the foreground. So that way you can just tape your little plastic stencil up onto the wall and spray it really fast. Then tape your next layer, spray that really fast, and you're done. And you won't get caught. Speaking of never getting caught, Banksy is probably the art world's most notorious graffiti artist. No one knows who he, she, it is. And that is one of the fun things about Banksy and what makes Banksy art so covetable, is that there's mystery involved there. And Banksy does like to make a lot of social commentary pieces, such as this one right here, how we used to hunt for our food and now we just go through fast food drive-thrus. And that is it for our printmaking. So just to recap, today we covered our 3 types of relief. Does anyone remember what those 3 types were? Linocut. Woodcut or woodblock, wood engraving, and linocut are our 3 kinds of relief prints. And then we went into intaglio. What do you use to make an intaglio print? Does anyone remember? Metal. You'll use a metal plate, or today plastic. Good. And then we went into lithography. How does lithography work? It's based on what? Grease and water repelling each other. Very good. And then we went to silkscreen, which we just watched, and I don't think we need a recap on it yet since it was like 2 seconds ago, and stencils, which are the most common forms of printmaking today. Rechecking attendance for people that came in late. You're Corey in the back, right? Corey or Ty? I don't know. He's asleep. I don't even know why he came. Litsy's not here today. Grace is usually here. I'm pretty sure that's Corey in the back. But we're gonna go with that. Okay, so just a reminder that you guys do have your little